Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Boss Economics World, where truth gets unpacked, and sometimes it's messier than a bad soup. Today, we have a fresh platter of economic nonsense served straight from the U.S. labor market kitchen, unemployment claims rising like yeast in a bread dough while the Federal Reserve continues waving the magic wand, hoping, we'll all clap anyway. Now don't get me wrong, I would love to join the applause and have a nice toast to employment stability like Jerome Powell claims, but the numbers, ladies and gentlemen, they are turning ugly. Recurring applications for unemployment benefits have hit their highest level in 3 years, think about that. It's supposed to be the holidays, the season of cheer and new jobs, but instead, more than 1.91 million Americans were dolefully adding their names to the unemployment benefits list as of mid-December. And I get it, maybe the officials are too caught up in holiday cheer themselves to notice, or maybe employment numbers aren't as juicy of a spotlight for policymakers. But of course, what else did they do? They point to the initial claims number, that ever-so-glorious headline figure, which at 219,000 sounds softer than a baby sleeping soundly in its crib. Oh, don't worry, everything's fine, they say. Smooth. At first glance, it might seem like this uptick is the result of something small, something preventable. You might even hear some happy-talking economist telling you this is just volatility, but that's about as truthful as saying a flat tire is just a minor dip in the road. When continuing claims rise steadily, this points to a structural issue, people. This isn't just 1.91 million lazy bums soaking up benefits, it's the living reality of a labor market cooling off, like that reheated coffee you forgot in the microwave. People aren't finding work, and that's the real alarm bell ringing here. Normally, when the economy is strong, people lose jobs, sure, it happens. But they find new employment relatively quickly, so everyone moves on smoothly. However, when recurring claims rise consistently, that's saying just one thing, people are stuck. It's like the economy churned them out, but it's not pulling them back in. Business can't absorb them because, surprise surprise, corporations too are feeling uncertain about future growth. This bottleneck is a scarier sign of an impending slowdown than those shiny jobless figures the government loves to throw around during policy pressers. The Federal Reserve and Chairman Jerome Powell keep reassuring markets that the labor market is in solid shape. Oh really, Jerome? Let's have a look at the facts. The infamous 4-week rolling average for new claims, a measure we economists love because it cuts through the week-to-week noise, rose to 226,500. Sure, marginal increases here and there are normal. But the trend is upward. Meanwhile, Powell's Fed has been on a chaotic rate-cutting spree, dropping interest rates 3 times in 3 months. As an observer, one must wonder, is this Fed beta testing economic easing? If the labor market is in such solid shape, as Powell says, why the urgency to slash rates? Could it be the baby-faced labor market everyone's admiring isn't so blessed after all? Interestingly, if you dig into the data, because, well, apparently we have to do everyone's job, you'll notice that New Jersey, Connecticut, and California saw the biggest increases in new applications. Now what does this tell us? The high cost of living and the uneasy mix between tech, finance, and service economies in these regions. It's hard to miss the signals of over-reliance on a precarious economy based on the tech sector, especially California, one downturn in Silicon Valley tech hiring, and you have a cascading socio-economic disaster. Now, Florida, New York, and the overlooked state of West Virginia, saw declines in new claims. While this might seem like a mini-win for these states, it's certainly not enough to offset the bigger, structural labor pains we're starting to see. The regional disparities are growing, which makes this more than just a national economic issue. It's becoming a regional crisis, where the usual suspects, high-tech, finance-fueled regions, are now pulling the rest of the country down with them. The coasts are suffering most while the center is holding, for now. In 2024, it is impossible to ignore that corporate layoffs and job offshoring trends are actually accelerating as major industries face unexpected pandemic aftermaths, geopolitical uncertainties, trade disruptions, and the mounting struggles of consumers grappling with both inflation and personal debt. Let's not forget that workers, too, are less and less protected. Take for example the ongoing mortgage rate shocks and the student loan repayment crisis crashing on everyday Americans. With average mortgage rates hitting beyond 7%, and student loan payments resuming after 3 years of pause, even households that felt somewhat stable post-pandemic are starting to crack. Increasing joblessness just amplifies that instability. So, while Powell continues touting the stability of the labor market, one has to question, how does that story hold up in the face of growing layoffs, skyrocketing debt burdens, and people literally struggling to find a meaningful job again? Ask yourself, why is the Fed cutting rates like it's handing out candy on Halloween if everything is solid? 3 rate cuts in a row, when you examine the macroeconomic backdrop, isn't a confidence move, it's more of a last-ditch bid to stave off something worse. Powell has insisted that he's trying to cool inflation, but could it be that the Fed is quietly fighting a tougher battle than they're letting on? Monetary policy has been put through the ringer here. With inflationary pressures persisting and wages stubbornly lagging behind, just ask the average American worker, cutting rates only goes so far when inflation is eating into real wage growth. It's trying to use a tiny band-aid to patch up a thoroughly broken leg. Automation is no longer looming, it's here, and the fear of future AI job displacement is very real. In industries from manufacturing to corporate services, job losses show they're being replaced by cheaper, more reliable tools. Think we're exaggerating? Companies that have been making announcements about cutting back aren't just shrugging off high costs of human workers, they see faster profit margins with tech and fewer labor headaches. Key demographic segments are seeing job opportunities dry up. Take retail, which has hemorrhaged jobs at an alarming pace due to the increasing dominance of e-commerce. Similarly, brick-and-mortar industries, sales, middle management roles, and blue-collar jobs are all under the hammer from globalized supply chains or online automation. With market instability impacted by everything from geopolitical turmoil to the still uncertain effects of the pandemic, corporate strategy is to be cautious, not bold. Companies are reluctant to expand hiring and are watching their bottom line closely. This means fewer new opportunities and slower job growth over the long term. After all this cutting and slicing of data, where does this leave us? For one, we have a labor market that fundamentally isn't as robust as the headlines claim, with millions of Americans either underemployed or struggling to re-enter the job force. Sure, the official unemployment rate might still look pretty, but the real story is beneath the surface. Millions of workers remain discouraged, falling out of the workforce altogether. In fact, the decline in labor force participation rates tells us something even more worrying: workers are giving up. In November 2024, the U.S. labor force participation rate hit 62.7%, demonstrating how shrunken and demoralized the job seekers are, even with employers desperately posting signs everywhere. Underemployment, part-time hours, gig work. We already know this isn't a sustainable path forward for working-class Americans, whose wages are barely keeping up with the cost of living. The rise of food prices and rent compared to stagnating wages is not just sluggish, but a disaster brewing on the stove. So can we finally admit it? The so-called economic recovery just hasn't arrived. The path forward is bumpy, and if policymakers continue to hawk a false vision of strength, we're in for deeper economic distortions down the road. Remember, once the glitter of low initial claims wears off and we stop performing statistical gymnastics, the cold, hard reality is that many Americans aren't just bouncing back. For now, the transformation we face is one of reconciling with a new reality. The U.S. economy isn't just cooling down, it's fundamentally shifting, and we must brace for impact. People are still unemployed, benefits are shrinking, inflation persists, wages are stagnant, and policies fail to meet people's real-world struggles. That's an economic recipe guaranteed to spill over. See you next time on Boss Economics World, where we break down the mess, so you're less likely to step in it. Stay sharp and stay informed.